Ahoy, me hearties! Raise the flags and hoist the sails! Today, we take to the seas with the Celebor's of Eborthil. House Celebor is a silver dynasty independent of the Empire of Anbennar, who, with or without elven influence, runs perhaps the most powerful human navy in the Divenhall Sea. Their family founder was Eborian Goldwaters, head admiral of the League of Free Realms and ally of Jaehaerys. Not only do the silver families have magic running through their blood, but King Delian II himself starts with a powerful mage trait in this campaign, which was a heavenly stroke of luck because I believe his starting traits change. They are locked in a rivalry with the Silnara Salt Lions, another silver family just across the Busilar Straits. Ally of House Silmuna, Eborthil was on the losing side of the Lilac Wars, but their armada of galleys successfully kept their home island safe. They even managed to sink a large portion of the Salt Lion fleet. The island of Tif itself is very rich, thanks to their copper and gold mining sites. It's easy to see this strip of land as a massively pumped up Venice, ruled by a magical, arguably half-elf king. King Daran's authority stretches into North Sarhal as well, due to his ownership of the throne of Deshak. This personal union was the result of the Gnollish invasion a few years prior. Not fully banished by the legions of Jaehaer, the demonic hyena and dogmen spilled into North Sarhal from some devilish womb of Halan. In their wake, the king of Deshak was murdered while he attempted to be heroic, and out of fear, the nobility turned to House Celebor for protection. Eborthil thus feels sandwiched between Busilar and the twin sea-scourged Gnoll hordes of Viakok and Brtekuch. Technologically backward, the Gnolls boast huge armies with fierce shock damage potential. They are not shy to take to the waters either, with Gnollish pirates being notoriously active. They are constantly looking to kidnap any sorry soul that they can find to offer them as sacrifice to their demonic masters. Not to be the only pest in the Divenhall Sea, they are also in competition for loot with the shady pirates of Nathalair. Tefori fleets definitely have their hands full. Eborthil does not need to stand alone against these dangers. A natural ally against Busilar are the heroic wyvern riders of Vern. In Sarhal, Keterata could also be a valuable ally, yet they begin in a dangerous civil war with Nirat. Befriending Keterata will secure a valuable alliance in the region and grant permanent claims for Elisna Island. This is important due to the fact that the major ambition for the Celebors is complete control over the islands that dot the Divenhall. Even if Eborthil is ruled by a king, they are a plutocracy, so ownership of the islands will allow the establishment of trade posts and therefore corner a major share of trade power in the adjacent regions. Once the fleet was rebuilt, the rich islands of the flooded coast became a target. Nathalair, aside from their piratical nuisance, was a rich and defensible urban province that could easily be taken. A temporary alliance with Chiliande kept Aranen's armies distracted while the Eborthili would descend upon the city. South of Nathalair, the rich sapphire mines of Gem Isle were also an objective, but further Gnollish expansion in Sarhal urgently shifted priorities. The next order of business would be to fight off the Gnollish hordes and gain control of Akan to establish a forward base for future exploration of the oceans to the west. The battered Keterata was also in dire need of assistance and would prove very important in facing off the disciplined elven armies of Elisna. The hill Gnolls in Kannor were a pushover for the wyverns of Vern, but the Sarhali hordes were not. United, they threatened to trample down the human longbowmen. King Daran's magical skills included the forbidden art to raise the dead, so he decided that his only chance for victory was to raise an undead horde to rival the hyenas. With a lumbering horde of weaponized zombies and skeletons, he marched towards Brtekuch's barricades and hurled magical fireballs in order to take them out before the hyena butchers got the chance to overwhelm him and his Deshaki comrades. Viakok's armies alone could then be fought on equal footing, and the Eborthili forward base in Akan was secured. Daran the Necromancer died while continuing the campaign to liberate the Akani people of the Eka Peninsula. With the death of a witch king, Eborthil had to suffer turmoil and the undead armies disintegrated under the scorching sun of the desert. But victory in Sarhal was now inevitable. The goblins of Bahar were also quite successful in the region, which made the conquest of Jam'ail, Pir Ail and Yametches a breeze. With the flooded coast islands under control, the navigators and artisans of the former pirate republic of Nathaler were resettled to the island of Tef, creating a booming paper business in the province of Stonegaze, to the dismay of the local merchant class. With the birth of the Renaissance institution, patronage of the arts was easy for the rich Tefori bankers, and even if the terrain was not ideal, heavy investment in artisanry allowed for easier development of the island provinces. Only Elisna stood in the way of Divenhall hegemony, but not for long. With Keterata's aid in the mainland, the Elven islands were also confiscated with ease. Fortified Tradathils were established on the island, setting them up as major trading centers, and Sun Elven Techelans from Elisna were incentivized to resettle in Tef, bringing with them a lucrative cloth industry in the province of New Tefkora. Business was booming like never before. This business needed to be protected and secured, and Eborthil embarked on a quest to make the island an impregnable fortress. None would rival dwarves at both building and at fortification, so copper dwarves from Ovdaltungr were also commissioned to help with the project, and some even settled on the island itself. Impressment offices were built to train and recruit sailors, the backbone of Eborthil's success. Once they were set up, the Goldwater squadrons would bring quantity to the quality of the Tefori navy. The development of cannon technology also made Eborthil bombardiers the best on all the seas, and their marine corps of naval saboteurs gave Tefori troops expert ability to handle the logistics of embarking and debarking during military expeditions. With dwarven advice, not only did fortifications thrive, but also metal production. The iron and gold mines worked overtime, providing materials for the cannons, gold for the bankers, and funds to fuel the trade of lumber from Bulvar and northern Anbennar. With such a rich base, the final push in Akan was easy, and the Gnolls were chased away, the lands cleansed of their demonic taint. The native Akan people were free to resettle in the previously devastated mountains and deserts of North Sarhal. This victory convinced the nobles of Deshak to accept formal annexation into the larger, more prosperous realm. And while the Tefori explorers set sail on exploration missions to the west, the only loose end remained the rivalry with Busilar. Eborthil's mission tree, while deliciously dense, can be essentially finished very fast, the only bottleneck being the requirement to construct a university, which is available much later. Until then, Eborthil rules the waves in everything but name, even before the spawning of colonialism. But in 1500, the institution of colonialism birthed an incredible drive to explore and exploit the riches of Aelentir and its precursor empire ruins. Even if the province of Kokerat had its Gnollish population purged, a Viakoki Gnoll captain by the name of Mykx escaped the Tefori marine raids and set sail to the ruined islands with her pack. The cannoneers of Eborthil were unfazed, certain that this band of hyena rogues would never stand a chance to become anything resembling a threat to the Tefori arsenal. Chief Admiral Mykx must have been spawned from the pits of Grillax themselves. Few intelligent creatures in Halan would live a life more violent, brutish, and short as a gnoll would. Created like other beasts by Agrados's violation of Halana, gnolls are a danger to themselves as much as they are a danger to others. Their hobbies largely consist of enslaving mostly everyone they meet and offering living sacrifices to their demon friends in the breaks between siblicides. A yipping, snickering, hairy, and probably unpleasantly fragrant festival of chaos. Out of this chaos, Mykx's survival was nigh miraculous, and her surviving pack acknowledged her as a legendary pirate admiral. With a relatively safe foothold on Ilzin Mykx, the fresh pirate republic had to make haste and explore the surroundings. You don't know, but the Gnolls knew that the explorers and conquerors to come would be mythical in nature. Even if disoriented after a long trip and final landing, explorers and conquistadors got to work immediately, scouting the ruined sea and the nearby island of Graxarr. Gnolls reproduced quickly and savagely. A small isolated island would not be able to satisfy the growing population. The colonial and pioneering rush was permeating the salty air. The home island needed docks, a shipyard, and more transport ships on the double. The fleet, once a scourge of Divenhall, was now beaten and broken. To survive the coming storms, it needed to be rebuilt. In a pirate society, every port, and especially every captain, tended to have their own set of laws. These laws, written down in articles or passed on verbally in smaller communities, differed wildly depending on whose town you were in or what ship you were on. For example, some captains would force those who withheld treasure to walk the plank, whilst others marooned them. Others would give them lashes. Admiral Mykx could use her clout as a legendary pirate to centralize some of the laws, beginning with the articles on the crippled and limbless, who would fill the streets as beggars and who were sorely needed in the workforce. She decided that crippled buccaneers would be compensated from their captain's coffers, giving them slightly more responsibility for their crewmates but also more influence in society. The Admiral also had a unique decision to make about restructuring her army. Gnollish warfare has always been synonymous with the primal savagery of a bygone era, but the survival of the Pirate Republic relied on modernization. Marine regiments suffered from decreased shock damage dealt, but the enemies of Mykx will have to be shocked with merciless blunderbuss fire and flamethrowers. This would hurt the pack on the short term, but lead to a much better performance in the future. Before we continue, let's take a look at the Gnolls. Chief Admiral Mykx being a lady dog is not unusual. Gnoll society, if we choose to call it that, sees pack mothers on the front lines and in advisory roles more often than other races. Their administrative traits are quite strange and can be seen as a mixed bag of bonuses and malices. Their main feature in my book is a flat plus 33% stability cost modifier. This is enormous and very damaging for the administrative mana pool. The yearly Republican tradition bonus and lesser heir claim means that they favor Republic government types. This way they can at least avoid stability hits so common in monarchies. They also construct spy networks impossibly slow with a 25% malice that ends up hurting administrative power even more because the number of points that you could save on fabricating claims is further decreased. On the other hand, they get a 20% reduction for unjustified demands, which adds up to the 50% reduction from being a monstrous nation, saving a lot of diplomatic mana in exchange. With so much extra diplomatic mana and a minus 10% liberty desire in subjects on the same continent, Gnolls can easily opt for playing a subjugation game with their neighbors. They specifically favor tributaries because straight vassals will be very difficult to integrate if the Gnolls stay monstrous. Their diplomatic relation improvement suffers directly with a 15% malice, but also indirectly due to their high prestige decay. This contradicts the vassal play dream somewhat, but does not straight up kill the idea. Economically, they gather less tax but have increased production, and their merchants add a +3 trade power each in the nodes where they operate, pushing them to favor trade and trade companies, which in Aelentir are a problem because Mykx cannot set up any trade companies anywhere in the continent. Non-pirate Gnolls may also freely raid coasts, but playing a pirate republic negates this racial bonus entirely. Gnollish military is a fairly fast, shock-based one. They can live off the land, suffering slightly less attrition and recover manpower slightly quicker than the average. Their brutal savagery damages enemy morale and they are able to loot very fast, which is their largest bonus. Size and brutality offer 10% extra shock damage and shock defense. They favor offense rather than defense with a direct fort defense malice. Funny enough, the biggest of their malices hit Mykx the hardest, with 10% extra fire damage received, 10% less ship durability, and an unusually high navy tradition decay. Their boats may be made of straw and garbage, but at least they're not afraid to get their furs wet. Well, back to our story then. While the hyena heads were setting up a new port in Graxarr and creating the necessary fleet infrastructure in their new home, The scout ships returned with reports from their adventures around the ruined sea. The islands in the eye of the cataclysm, scattered as they were fairly fertile. There was a lot of room for colonization, and Mykx decided that the maximum colonization focus was a main priority. Damn administrative mana to the bottom of the sea! The obsessive naval focus transformed Ilzin Mykx into a bustling harbor never before seen since the time of the precursors. Yet competition would be fierce, with this new unclaimed world becoming smaller each month, with more and more Canorians competing for land with a few ruin-born tribes scattered in Norwyn. The most eager colonizers were the Seaflower Knights of Deran and the Elven Reclaimers of Venail. Their tendrils were spreading across Endraliande and reached into Norwyn and Daler. Many more splinter states ran by adventurer kings, and greedy entrepreneurs were being set up by refugees and fortune seekers. Valor Point, Chestirmark, Isobelin, Thilvis, Marilande, Zanlib, and Sorikande hugged the Norwyn coast, ready to give up their riches and men to the slavering Gnollish fleet. Closer to home, the Kalasani Trade Company of Arbaran was setting up harbors in the island chain to the southwest. The Copper Dwarves of Asraport landed to the east, south of Endraliande. The Bulvari Captain Lord Samir Rukashah, a particularly zealous adversary of the Gnolls, was also colonizing a small island chain to the west. Another splinter group from the Deran Trade Company was controlling the straits to the north. A lucrative stepping stone of trade between Norwyn and Canor. Like a litter of unhealthy pups, these upstart groups had to be put in a sack and thrown to the mercy of the waves. The Kalasani were first to drown, while Admiral Mykx codified the punishment articles, making sure that all crimes against the Admiralty would be met with forced colony service. Anyone who would steal from the mother harbor would be sent to toil alongside the slaves in Jersel, the Gnollish foothold in Endraliande. The Kalasani outposts were raided for loot, booze, and slaves. All of them were relocated to the home islands to toil the soil and work in the new Grand Harbor. The second to fall were the Dwarves of Traveler's Rest. Dwarves made for the best slaves a master can have. Not only they would brew the meanest of brews to bless the tankards of Mykx, they would be extremely valuable in developing construction projects across the newly conquered islands. The raiders of the Ruined Sea reported a new development to the southwest. Far but not far enough, men of Telgeir have established an outpost in Tornai. Risking encirclement, the hungry fleet assaulted Ricard's port, eager to steal any plans for advanced firearms that the Vambury Guild would carry. On home soil, Admiral Mykx debated internally the way in which Gnolls and pirates settled disputes. Duels were commonplace in their society, so common actually that every dock had to employ pier rags, slaves whose job was to clean the harbors of corpses, blood and guts. The loss of so many valuable sea legs had to be stopped, so at the cost of the little stability that existed in the pirate realm, she had to officially outlaw duels. On the return of the fleet to Ilzin Mykx, they reported that the Black-clad Legion had been seen debarking at the southern tip of Norwyn, bordering Cheshoshoanta, most likely originating from the sinister plains of Corvuria. Was there no end to these Canorians? So many people so eager to row the galleys and man the cannons of the Scourge fleet. The colonists could barely keep up with the relentless colonization of the islands, and even so, the home island chain was not fully under control. The pressure from Canor did not relax at all, and the Admiral had a bold idea. Exploiting the Canorian colonization efforts worked very well until now, but it was a reactive enterprise. It was indeed time to get proactive and take intentional advantage of the pioneering spirit of these people. Canorian colonies did not yet establish strong fleets to rival the Gnolls, so from behind a wooden shield, the Gnolls could land and take over whichever colonies they pleased. Deran was a good target to test this strategy, and Mykx attacked their holdings in the north of the Ruined Sea. As long as no Gnoll was going to set foot into mainland Daler and the Scourge fleet would patrol Calamity's Pass to sink any intruders, then the operation of taking over colonies from them would be safe. War could be waged indefinitely from the safety of the waves, a safety that would end up being the downfall of the followers of Samir. War on two fronts would normally be risky, but the Sun Cult humans would eventually give up their freedom and their few trinkets that they brought over from Bulvar. The survivors were sold off on the black market as slaves to the willing buyers who landed in Norwin. Little did the buyers know that their shores would eventually be raided by the Gnolls and their purchased goods would be loaded back onto the heavy ships anyway. While the original plan was sound, Duran stopped colonization during the war, and keeping the ongoing conflict hot became unnecessary. Admiral Mykx had to settle for the harbor of Antir Soara and the Lonely Island in the northern Thaw. This gave the Gnolls a forward base to perhaps raid Canor in the future. The colonizing teams were sent to Unitz and Graxarr to unite the home chain, while the Marines set sail to the southern tip of Norwin. The aim was to trap the Onyx Legion and prevent them from expanding. Their black-clad knights would put up a fierce fight, and the mainland outpost was dangerous. Laurentish pioneers were already seen in the north. If they would penetrate into Norwin, the buccaneers would surely be crushed under the hooves of Laurentish gun knights. But once the colonies in the home islands were finished, a grand discovery was made in Graxarr. A large precursor structure still standing. It was an alluring sight. The older folk who sailed from Divenhall still remembered how rare and rich the vessels carrying alleged precursor relics were. Now they were in Aelentir and would be getting the real stuff right from the source. An expedition was sent deep into the jungle to explore the discovered temple. A circular array of towers dominated the landscape, with not a single vine having grown on them. At the base of the towers was a floor made of solid white stone, which gave way to multiple winding staircases, as well as gilded doors leading inside the towers. Some doors were easy to yank off, some were too thick to break. Exploration teams came to dead end after dead end. Eventually they found a hallway with open doors leading to a large room filled with various trinkets. One captain even remembered of a cargo she once seized from a Brasane ship headed to Canor that contained similar items. While progress was limited, many relics were returned to the Smugglers Guild to be packaged for sale on the Canorian black markets. The impressive architecture found in Graxarr seemed to have a resemblance with noble estates from Anbennar, but the temple and its surroundings were ancient and crumbling. The Xhazobkult was particularly excited to settle into the temple. Dwarven slaves were sent over from Ilzin Mykx to fix up the place and set it up as a grand cathedral of the cult. On a larger scale, expansion up and down the ruined sea opened up countless opportunities for raiding, and with large-scale slave-gathering operations, the Administrating Council was working hard to try and get the most out of it. Even with the Admiral's regulation, it seemed like passing legislature was a Sisyphean task in the pirate realm of Mykx. The only solution was to incentivize fleet captains to share the loot with the home harbor. Whatever they would do, they would police their own men and would be compensated with both hard cash and with a promise of land in the ruined islands. This type of corruption would be rewarded with an increase of republican tradition from raiding coasts, which was a decent trade-off in the eyes of the Admiralty. Claims on the entire Ruined Sea archipelago gave the buccaneers cause for war against the Deran Trade Company. Their feeble alliance set up with Isobelin and Marilande gave them no protection, and the Marines landed on the Silensald Isles unopposed. The cult slaves slowly restored the temple in Graxarr. Dozens of rooms have been converted into bedrooms, libraries, and altars, and the cathedral at Graxarr became the primary seat of the Xhazobkult in Aelentir, if not the world. This gave the cult an official chair in the factionalism of the Pirate Republic. Let's talk about this Gnollish religion for a bit. A demonic cult at worst, Gnollish folk belief with a fiendish undertone at best. The Xhazobkult revolves around the rise and fall of the Xhazobin, a demonic messiah, a Gnoll chosen by demons to be their champion. When a Xhazobkult is found, then the Gnolls are whipped into a demonic fervor and united into a Xhaz, a horde dedicated to the whims of their leader. While a few of these did exist in history, no Xhazobkult was seen in more than 2 centuries. The religion itself is quite unique and uses the vanilla Orthodox religion as a base, but functions differently in many ways. It grants higher morale of armies and more available loot, while being tough to convert. A hidden effect is that non-Gnolls understandably hate it and will fiercely resist conversion at a -3% missionary penalty. Their fate is inevitably linked to the sacrificial pyres, so of course they will resist. The cult gathers sacrifices and sends them to their demonic overlords through sacrificial pyres. These sacrifices are gathered in battle or through unique state edicts. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are, though. To build pyres, unique state edicts need to be set in place, which increase devastation and gather victims, until one can be constructed via decision. Having a pyre built, these victims can then be sent to the demons in exchange for demonic power. Demonic power will progressively grant discipline, regiment cost reduction, and local manpower. Most importantly, it increases raising power gain, which for the Pirate Republic is fairly irrelevant for most of the game. In the latest patch, pirates are only allowed to raise provinces at government reform tier 10, which is fairly late. The malices of demonic power are quite punishing. 20% less goods produced, 20% extra technology cost, and +4 unrest at maximum are the more obvious ones. The way to use it, I guess, is to organize a large sacrificial party before a war, unleash the savage hordes upon unfortunate prey, raise all the conquered lands, and then cast demonic invocations to lower demonic power and carry on with the administration of the horde until the next war. The invocations are quite powerful and will last for a few decades. Invoking a demonic power will lower the bar by 5 points and can grant manpower recovery, technology cost reduction, more goods produced, and other useful bonuses. For a quick invocation in a fully controlled state, a local cult can be initiated for a one-time bonus of 5 demonic power points and a permanent effect that will lower goods produced by 5%, but grant more manpower, local regiment cost, friendly movement speed, and more attrition for enemies. As a countermeasure for the many goods produced reduction modifiers, the monstrous tribe estate has access to a unique privilege. With this privilege, every non-Gnollish culture province with a Xhazobkult Religion present will grant a whopping 40% extra local goods produced, which is insane, but at the cost of a general -3 tolerance of heathens. While this sounds awesome on paper, the resistance to conversion does make it very hard to set the system up. And all systems work together to raise unrest to enormous levels, at least for Mykx. Even with a Xhazobkult unique faction, it is very difficult to convert without investing in religious ideas, and the faction itself reduces tolerance of heathens even more. Purging or expelling other races instead might help on the long run and solve unrest issues a bit, but that means that there will be little to no provinces eligible for the weak serve the strong effect. On the other hand, from a flavor perspective, it's understandable that people resist conversion so vehemently. Even as a despicable monster, converting to a faith that will definitely come to enslave and sacrifice you to demons so eagerly is something that you will most certainly disagree with. Back in Aelentir, in the far west, the shores of Haraf began to be crowded by the 3 artificer states. The gnomes of Gomoport, the goblins of Mesticardu, and the kobolds of Zurzumexia. 3 rivals racing against each other in the search of precursor artifacts to fuel their drive for innovation and invention. On home turf, more problems arose from the chaotic urban corruption of Mykx harbor towns. Officials would complain that captains zealously spill blood in these towns, extorting local citizens or worse. This scum would be sometimes hired by town guards to do their job for them, or sometimes they would just pretend that they were hired by the state to justify their actions. A government contract reform was urgently needed to regulate the type of contracts allowed in the Republic. With colonial fervor in full swing, the Admiralty decided that the best option was to allow colonialists to purchase prisoners for colony building. which would radically improve settler growth at the cost of even more unrest. The cult had in the meanwhile requested a permanent fortification on their new temple island to keep the devastation caused by their rituals minimal and localized, as well as to better control the influx of sacrifices. With a fort constructed and temple repaired, they were ready to ignite a massive pyre atop the temple. This fire would burn eternal, continuously fed by wood and bodies. The cult requested that the Everpire remain the only sacrificial ground so that they could keep close oversight and counter any unwanted side effects. Decentralized pyres were not necessary anymore, and extra offerings could be henceforth brought to Graxarr whenever the Admiralty chose to do so. The other factions were impressed by the new bonfire, but gave little more than a metaphorical thumbs up at its inauguration. Captains, buccaneers, and smugglers were interested in the occasional invocation of the eyes or invocation of the chains, but nothing more to justify sending substantial offerings to the temple. The Xhazobkult eventually discovered a way to make them care. They worked silently on being able to infuse demon power into the cannons of the navy. With the Hellfire-infused ships, the Scourge fleet would fire with substantial power, able to sink even Laurentish or Eborthil fleets when the times would demand it. Costly in demonic power, the Hellfire cannon infuser would be a tool that could be employed in wars where the naval supremacy of Mykx would not be guaranteed. The captains were happy to have a new tool in their arsenal, and the buccaneers' constant raids gathered enough loot to substantially increase the navy infrastructure in the island chains. Such a large influx of loot made loot sharing on ships an issue that required the attention of the home harbor. Arguments between captains and buccaneers intensified due to the different practices seen as unfair by both parties. Mykx decided that captains would be the sole authority to decide the sharing of prizes, even if they would receive even more power overall. Keeping them happy meant that they would be a lesser danger to the harbor in Ilzin Mykx, with a happy side effect of cheaper naval maintenance, so lucrative when having to administrate such a majestic fleet. During the second sabotage of Deran's colonial efforts, after 23 years of ruling, legendary admiral and pirate Mykx finally succumbed to old age. She would go down in history not only as a visionary who traveled to an archipelago in a faraway continent to make it her own, but also a mother of those who came with her. Wherever she walked, she instilled fear. Fear for her towering stature, powerful build, ruthless punishments, and vicious battlefield tactics. She did not instill fear over the future of the Republic, though. There, she radiated success. She was revered in death as she was in life. Countless captains went to visit her casket to pay their respects. It was customary even before the time of Mykx, back in Viakok, that when a captain would die, the remaining captains of a fleet would leave something of value in the casket to help pay for a proper funeral. Her open casket has gotten so full with treasure that her face was almost getting covered, so a second casket had to be placed nearby. The funds were used to build a grand carrack that would bear her fury, and as she was sent to Davy Jones, the Pirate Republic went back to doing what it did best: terrorize the seas of Aelentir. And with the smugglers setting up a ruined sea monopoly in the domestic major trading ports, the Admiralty planted a government official on every significant vessel to ensure that Mykx's set of law articles were adhered to. The Republic of Mykx braced for a major feast to celebrate the grandness of the Republic that it had become under the skull and crossbones banner of their original pack mother. Captain Brotiak of the flagship Domination strangled his way to the role of admiral, continued to terrorize Deran, and attempted to stop the nations spawned in Haraf from expanding too much, but a four-way war seemed a bit excessive, and manpower was harder and harder to find. Besides, letting the artificers keep their coastal provinces would only mean more loot to be had for the buccaneers in future raids, so he recalled the fleets home for the planned feast. And it was perfectly planned. First, the Grand Republic of Mykx would be declared in the capital Ilzin. Then state officials would parade through the streets, heading for the docks, where they would board the grand ship and head for Graxarr, where a mass sacrifice has been prepared for the occasion. A single hiccup occurred. It turned out a lot of officials brought celebrities, friends, family, and even random people from the streets on the ship to come watch the ceremony. As it turned out, a group of drug dealers had made it onto the ship and had begun selling a new and upcoming substance they called Demon's Blood. It made one unable to feel pain, and it enhanced emotions such as joy, anger, and lust. If enough was snorted, it could even bring one closer to the realm of demons and allow one to communicate with them. This drug was clearly in an experimental phase, as demonstrated by the fact that 3 Gnolls had already died before the ship reached Graxarr, with one even managing to summon a demon as they vomited out their lungs. Grand Admiral Brotiak himself had tried it, and far from sparingly. When the hundreds of Gnolls made it to Graxarr to watch the cult throw hundreds upon hundreds of slaves onto the pyre, the crowd seemed even more ecstatic than before, as if the demon's blood was aligning their desires with those of the demons they aimed to please. After the ceremony, doctors had to be called for Brotiak the Strangler and many others, but all in all it was a good time. The Grand Admiral survived the party but lost Thekek, his chief smuggler. Yet the path forward was clear. This is what was missing from the slavering, demon-worshipping, dog-headed pirate inferno. Drugs! If they could perfect the formula and then use the skilled network of smugglers to spread the demon's blood through Aelentir and beyond, they wouldn't have to search and raid for slaves. People would enslave themselves willingly to the Gnolls. Genius. Expanding the horizons, the Admiralty looked to the east and the Banished Isle harbors. Endraliande and the Ravenous Isle to its south were split between the Gnolls, the remnants of New Darom, a hostile Venail, and the colony of the terribly dangerous Eborthil, with some timid incursions of the Wyvern Riders of Vern here and there. In the west, the foothold on Tornaillis proved to be a stepping stone to some of the richest sources of precursor artifacts in Aelentir, Keonai and Eordand. The Ruinborn and their loot were soon to be parted. The electoral system was slightly rethought to favor frequent elections, fair and pleasing to the chaotic mess that was the Republic of Mykx. The bureaucracy also needed expansion. The small Gnollish alliance that landed in Aelentir was now larger and larger every year, and keeping up with the governing capacity requirements was a challenge. In exchange for extra maintenance cost of states and even more corruption, the Grand Republic would enjoy extra administrative efficiency and governing capacity, so that it could actually use the land it conquered to its full potential. The plan to form the Marine Corps had to be put on hold. As valuable as it would be to strengthen the tactics of the Marines, the professionalism required for it was simply out of reach. The Gnolls were nothing more than a band of disorganized brutes with blunderbusses, and it would take training to make an army out of the scattered mess of pirates and buccaneers. Training was not something the Admiralty could afford. In all honesty, there was not much that they could afford. The pirate realm was not producing any money. Reliance on raiding to feed the economy was very volatile, and many more funds were necessary to improve the workings of the state, as well as to fund the demon's blood research. The elven colony of Aeliande would have to pay a part of the bill, but it was not nearly enough. "1532 was the year where the world started to fight back. Admiral Mykx initially fled via Kok and their Eborthili rivals. The Gnollish pack was once again under siege by the greatest armada in the Divenhall. Eborthil was an organized force and would not be a pushover. Worst of all, they were backed up by Vern's fleet, who were more than eager to hunt monsters in the colonies for honor and glory. The only hope for the Gnolls was that inland sea fleets of galleys would be ineffective in the open waters of the ruined sea. Battle on two fronts and rebels openly taking arms all over the place did not stop the Admiralty to also attack Diran once again. Their only ally Laurent was exhausted from wars with the Empire of Anbennar and was not willing to defend them. The Scourge fleet patrolled the west of Endraliande on a lookout for Eborthili and Vernman strike forces. If this sounds stressful, it's because it was, and this would not stop anytime soon. As long as any colonies from Cannor existed in Aelentir, Mykx would be in peril. At the very least, through raiding and demanding reparations from the invaders, funds needed for the demon's blood research were finally gathered. Chemists have been trying to refine both the production and the end result of demon's blood for close to a year. The results were said to be very promising. Not only have production costs been slashed, but scientists have also been able to replace certain ingredients with more viable substances. What's more, they have developed several variants of the drug with different purposes. A variant intended for the military, which enticed rage but diminished sensations such as pain. A variant intended for the clergy, which did very little to enhance their sense of pleasure. The dosage and ingredients instead aimed to induce very heavy demonic hallucinations and open up one's body to demonic powers. A variant was intended for the upper classes, which was a bit milder than the usual recipe, but much safer. It allowed for increased pleasure and could bring forth mild demonic hallucinations. A variant was intended for both internal and external export, which was cheaper and more dangerous than others. It made one energetic and stimulated feelings of joy and lust. It could bring forth severe demonic hallucinations and even outright killed some. All of these versions were highly addictive and were definitely going to be made illegal by foreign powers once they discovered using it can lead to demonic visions, hallucinations, possessions, and even summonings. In order to start producing demon's blood in such quantity that could supply both the internal and potential external markets, the pirates had to secure vital resources, ramp up production, and redesign their port infrastructure. One of these resources was a rare type of mushroom procured from Parura Lichden Ruinborn, who sailed up the rivers in the inhospitable jungle province of Machunana for them. The other resources based on the tea, spice, and tobacco plants could be acquired from their own controlled islands. Sailors across Halan would start singing a brand new tune. Soon may the Gnoll man come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our demon's blood. The dealers, plantation owners, lab workers, and smugglers of demon's blood have started to ramp up production and distribution and were quickly making a name for themselves throughout Mykx and even some foreign ports in Aelentir. Bloodbringers was what the people called them. These bloodbringers had petitioned the government to secure valuable export ports in Norween, so excess produce can be safely sold to foreigners. They had aligned themselves with the smuggler faction. With the Tier 6 Black Market Consortium's help, the next order of business was to effectively set up these trade posts and markets in key strategic centers of trade in Sela, Cheshoshomar, and the Trolls Bay. This would have been a relatively simple task, but the nation of Pearl's Edge decided to get in the ring. The fleet and the marines were ready to fight again and made haste to assault the South Pearl colonies of Turtleback Island. While the warrior packs, on the other hand, were preparing to penetrate the perilous rainforests of the Cheshoshi. The coastal city of Cheshoshchuka had been of particular interest to multiple factions in the realm for a long time. The smugglers would have liked to tap into its abundance of precursor relics. The Xhazobkult wanted to see if the renowned Bone Citadel in the province could be repurposed into a grand temple for the cult that would dwarf even Graxarr. Now the Bloodbringers were also pushing for the state to conquer the province and allow them to use it to export demon's blood into Cheshoshomar from there. No long after securing the Bone Citadel and beginning the work to establishing a core and exploring the potential of this grand monument of death, the elves of Moonhaven also decided to attack. They were not worthy of the Hellfire cannons. Their efforts were bafflingly futile, yet here they were. Lorent was a different story. The wars with West Dam and the Empire kept Lorent busy for many decades, but they eventually rose back up from bankruptcy and ruin. The Knights of Lorent sailed into Tournailly, looking for precursor relics, but found only drunken gnolls and drugs. What did they do with the drunken dogmen early in the morning? They attacked and tried to kill them, that's what. Needless to say, they were appalled and disgusted by what they had found. The world was determined to be in a perpetual war with Mykx. Under these conditions, the sacrifices fueled the pyre, and the infernal cannons of the Gnollish fleet blew the Canorians into oblivion. The battered survivors were pressed into service on Mykx ships or sent back to Graxarr to feed the demonic cycle. If neither Laurent nor Eborthil could stop this madness, then clearly nobody else would stand a chance. Tired but with renewed confidence, the Grand Republic was ready to exploit the unwise conflict between the adventurers in Norwin to set up shop in Sella, on the eastern shores of the region. The ruin-born tribe of Mykx was also forced into service and would bear the brunt in the regional conflicts, as well as administrate some of the conquered provinces. Laurent already had established a strong foothold near the Troll's Bay in Nur-Ionidar, but the Gnolls advanced ever faster. Violence and bloodshed, attacking and being attacked, the campaign of expansion began to be more and more chaotic and hellish. Touring the coasts for plunder, assaulting unsuspecting colonies, while fending off Canorian punishers of all shapes and sizes. Desperately looking for any chance to make some extra money. Devastation and unrest everywhere all the time. Foolish Laurent, after having fleet after fleet sunk and many heroic knights sent to the bottom of the ocean, clad in their shining rose-tinted armor, was eventually forced to retreat from and give up Venail Island. This new base would catapult the Scorch fleet back into the Divenhall. Eborthil was still safe behind their coastal batteries and fortifications, but for how long? Anbennarians collectively held their breath in terror. To the horror and frustration of the human kings and emperors, the Gnolls survived and even thrived in a twisted way. It seemed like there was nothing that they could do to stop the wet, snickering horde. The Xhazobkult, with the help of the Bloodbringers and dwarven slaves, removed the Ruinborn from Xhazobkult and began repurposing the Great Bone Citadel. Just like the Xhazobkult faith, the Cheshoshi sacrificed living people for religious purposes, but where the Gnolls could see tangible results as demonic forces empowered their people, the Cheshoshi meaninglessly sacrificed in this citadel to appease some non-existent god, who Gnollish translators have interpreted to be the embodiment of ruin, who they hoped would strike at everyone in the world but them. Their obviously fictitious god was laughable at best, but their bone citadel was nonetheless impressive and worthy of restoration. Not for Cheshosh, the imaginative god of death and ruin, but for the tangible demons that would see this place of death and decay as a piece of their own world on Halan. The cult urged preparations for repairs of the dilapidated citadel at once. And as soon as the repairs were done, a part of the elders from the Xhazobkult faction wanted the Everpire in Graxarr to be moved to the Bone Citadel itself. Others wanted it to stay in Graxarr. But there was even a group of elders who wished for two Everpires. The state funded the construction of a second Everpire in Xhazobkult. Only a few colonies remained a threat: Minaria of Laurent and the South Pearls of Pearl's Edge. But they were preemptively taken down at the first opportunity by the Marines. It seemed like some peace and quiet could be found at last, and action could replace reaction in the turbulent history of Mykx. Wrong, of course! Bjarnrik and the West Dam also decided to venture into South Aelentir. Pearl's Edge decided to try again and punish the Gnolls for their crimes. 3 defensive wars were soon to be considered just another Tuesday in the Pirate Republic, merely a flesh wound that would be open again and again. When she was just a captain in the Viacoka Navy, Mykx often clashed with her leader, so it was no surprise to Viacok when she led several ships in mutiny against him. He was prepared for this and quickly moved to have her ships surrounded. But Mykx skillfully outmaneuvered his fleets and escaped to Aelentir. The humiliation of Viacok was always proudly remembered and inspiring to the other captains, and this pride was going to guide them in the perpetual conflicts with their human threats. Many of these humans would vanish in the so-called Ruin Triangle, a common name for the region with its corners at the islands of Verten, Great Tusok, and Asraport, infamous for making ships disappear when charting courses through it. Many ships in Mykx's navy suspiciously resembled these lost vessels. Also, while the Canorian colonies employed slave labor to work the fields, their approach was too narrow-minded. They enslaved orcs, and while they were fine workers, the Gnolls have always had a more egalitarian approach to slavery. Humans, orcs, elves, ruin-born, and anything else that would be unfortunate to be captured by the Mykx raiders would work together to improve the Republic's output of goods. With a large military PowerPoint investment, sufficient professionalism was achieved to better combine the strengths of the army and the navy. With so many warriors stationed on ships almost permanently, the Marine Corps was very effective at not only inspiring the discipline of the troops, but also at attracting more sailors to fight. Gnoll infantrymen were fierce fighters, but financial motivation could draw even more of that innate bloodlust. The best fighters and raiders would be rewarded more handsomely with loot from their victories. If a battle would be too chaotic to tell, they were sorted out based on whoever came back covered in the most blood. After forming the Marine Corps, military reformers looked upon the chaotic state of the Navy as a whole. Many sailors did not have any basic fire, climbing, or combat training. It was okay for slaves to be incompetent, for they just had to row, but Gnollish sailors being untrained began to feel like a disgrace. For this, the very first Gnollish university was built, to act as a naval academy for officers and swabbies to attend, if any of them could stay sober for more than 5 minutes. Even if they were not Harimari, Gnolls still had a healthy aversion to water despite their naval-oriented culture, which was probably the reason why they had to stay drunk and high throughout their short and nasty careers. After the academy was inaugurated, it came to the leadership's attention that a large percentage of the population could not in fact swim. This was a reason why the sinking of a ship was so disastrous for the Republic. The gurgled screams of drowning Gnolls would be heard across an entire naval battlefield as soon as their first ship started sinking. This was bad for morale and unnecessary loss of sailors. To the dismay of the students, the academy's swimming lessons were sponsored. Bureaucracy was also a growing challenge, with many administrators preferring cushy jobs in Ilzin Mykx to the detriment of faraway provinces. Well-paid administrators simply refused to move to backwater towns to collect taxes and uphold laws. An innovative plan was set up to have small to medium-sized coastal towns being administered not by local government personnel but by bureaucrats who traveled by boat from larger coastal cities to do their jobs. A large-scale shipyard infrastructure was set up to facilitate this project and ensure that any administrator could dock their ships in regions where they operated. With war being truly never-ending and with constant expansion in all directions of the compass, the final massive step of faction reforms was undertaken. Infighting among privateers over loot and plunder made it necessary for the buccaneers to be more efficient in coordinating plunder raids. The smugglers learned to leverage dwarven workers better after the experience gained while repairing the Bone Citadel. Life in the Republic was costly, but construction would be cheaper and easier than ever before. For the captains, a banking system was installed using ideas borrowed from the slaves of Xhazobkult. Instead of burying treasure, captains could now store it in a national bank where it could be properly taxed by the state. The captains were in turn recompensed with a retiree program, protecting them from abject poverty caused by injury, misfortune, or age. This was a shame for the Republic and the loss of experienced individuals. The retiree program not only protected many Gnollish heroes, but also made it possible to use their expertise in advisory roles. The world from the Ringlet Sea in South Hales to the Dame's Head Sea in the heart of Anbennar was turning into a pirate heaven, and into a hell for everyone else. And speaking of hell, in Norwyn the improvements made to the Bone Citadel made the area more hospitable to Gnolls and demons alike. Visions, possessions, and even demonic rampages were more and more commonplace, which was a good thing. A group of cult priests have approached Scourge Father Krikir the Unwashed, informing the state that demons who talk to them when they are in prayer at the Citadel wish for it to become even bigger and more prestigious. They also demanded a sacrificial feast of legendary proportions. In return, they offered what they thought the Gnolls desired most: a demonic ship so powerful it would exceed their wildest expectations. Ooh, a demonic ship, say no more. Funds were allocated and slaves put to work. Soon enough, the bargain was fulfilled. thousands upon thousands of slave lives, coins, and hours have gone into expanding the Bone Citadel. A massive amount of prisoners were hurled into the grand pyres on the beach and atop the temple. As the last prisoner begged for mercy and was thrown into the flames, storm clouds formed over the nearby waters. As the blood of 1,000 sacrifices painted the sea red, a green glow began to emanate from below the surface. The light kept going brighter until a ship broke through, and as it rose, it began shedding the water, blood, and seaweed covering it. Slowly, the form of a magnificent carrack became visible, and the admiral dubbed it Mother Mykx. In function, it was not very different from the previous flagship, but if the demons were happy, the Admiralty was happy too. The ship was the inspiration that the Gnolls needed to face their final adversary. It was time to face Death Island head-on and prove to the demons and gods of the seas that none could stop the infernal pirate horde. Although assaulting the greatest fleet base in Canor head-on was still a bad idea, the Admiralty saw an opportunity to exploit a small coalition that formed against them. The only two coalition partners were the colony of South Pearls and Eborthil itself. This would allow the Buccaneers to attack the South Pearls and fully siege them, while attempting to outmaneuver the Eborthili galleons and try to land on Tef itself. This scheme was perfect in circumventing Eborthil's web of alliances, and a great advantage against their incredibly competent army stationed in Busilar and North Sarhal. Strategy and not tactics were important on the ground. On the seas, the Hellfire-infused cannons roared. It was not the first time when the Golden Tefori fleet met the infernal conflagration, but dealing with it so close to home amplified their fear. The cannons themselves have been improved and standardized across the navy and the army. This latest development was due to Dwarven standard of living increasing across Mykx. Dwarven banking had the effect of moving the bearded slaves up on the social ladder a little bit, with the permission of their masters, of course. One of the dwarves has set up a small cannon production facility and was building weapons of reputable quality and uniformity. His master claimed that his dwarf was a descendant of a long line of smiths and petitioned the Admiralty to adopt his methods of cannon smithing and construct a major production facility in Wanderer's Bay. This new military-industrial complex was first tested against the Canorians with explosive success. Conquering the provinces bordering the Busilar Straits was the first morning bell for Tef. With Eborthil's capital exposed, their naval defense infrastructure would be rendered useless in the wars to come. The Tefori would eventually be taking lethal drugs and worshipping demons whether they liked it or not. The biggest shame was that the Gnolls had no idea how to use the captured defensive infrastructure, so it ended up crumbling under the Republic's oversight. Asserting Gnoll dominance in the Busilar Straits proved to the world that Mykx could no longer be considered just another state, but a true hegemon of Aelentir. Their influence would stretch across countless seas, and every continent knew of their plunderers, privateers, smugglers, and drugs. They were the true scourge of all seas. Well, thank you for coming with me on this sailing adventure on the high seas. I've been dying to play Mykx ever since the Lions of the North expansion, with the many unique pirate reforms and quality of life improvements like the piracy map mode. Yet after this campaign, having Mykx and quality of life in the same sentence sounds bizarre. I decided to further sabotage myself in multiple questionable ways. One was to turn on mythical conquerors, thinking I wouldn't care that much about it being safely tucked away on a different continent, separated from the great powers. I was mostly lucky that Laurent didn't get away with the game very early, else I believe I would have had a different level of challenge. Another was to stay true to the flavor of the nation, clinging to the Xhazobkult Religion even when the Ravelians spawned, which are majorly superior, with their easy conversion methods and their free stability boosts among other bonuses. The final mission reward is also a joke, in both narrative and mechanical terms. It mentions the joyous humiliation of Viakok, a nation that disappeared from the map 3 centuries before. But I can make the argument that one stability point is 33% more valuable for the Gnolls. I am glad that I could also do a short spotlight of Eborthil. Canor was the first developed region, and the older mission trees are quite outdated in comparison to the modern ones. Yet this one is still quite fun, with the many bonuses they can collect for their home island. I was slightly disappointed that I could not keep those bonuses after conquering the island from them. Aside from being the only fleshed out pirate republic in the game, Mykx does collect a lot of permanent modifiers. They are very flavorful, but for the many quality bonuses that they grant, they do put a serious strain on your economy, making everything more expensive, from army maintenance to state maintenance, and really hurt your budget with their large number of increased corruption modifiers. It takes quite some time to set up a positive passive income. You need to be very active with piracy and war reparations to be able to keep your bank from collapsing under the weight of the many loans that you'll have to get. When I finally unlocked bounty hunting at government tier 7, it felt like a massive relief. Capturing and sinking enemy flagships really helped a lot. The set of laws in the early mission tree create a tough choice, especially when having to choose for extra colonists. They do remain permanent and cannot be revoked later, so they must be chosen wisely. With so many sailor numbers, sailor recovery, sailor maintenance, and marine force limit bonuses and modifiers, Mykx can potentially use all marines in their infantry slots instead of regular infantry, which is fun when island hopping. But even so, it's not as simple as to substitute all troops that use manpower. Sailors are still fewer in raw numbers. I also went all in with exploration, maritime, and naval ideas, which were sorely needed for survival. I believe there is a real argument for having religious ideas unlocked early with this tag to try and set up some nice goods produced farms in some areas. I also clicked the naval hegemon button for once, which is also inferior to the other hegemonies, but it was a nice change. Thank you very much for watching, and special thanks for the ongoing support of the Patreons and YouTube members. So thank you Baconomics, thank you Casimir Overell, thank you Loop4x, thank you Darth Mozart, thank you Maybe Pigeon, thank you Peter Mushinsky, thank you Alex, thank you Jacob Rubin, thank you Michael VR, thank you Old Toby, thank you Shredded Paper Plate, thank you Thorsmain, and thank you Deppard. Don't forget to eat an orange from time to time to avoid scurvy, and have a nice Cheers!